Okay, guys, I am inside this session that I titled Midi Edit Tools. But before we get started, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of our tools. So first of all, we can find our Midi Edit tools in one of two ways. We can go up to Event Operations, and we can open up this Event Operations window, or we can skip right to the tools. I'm going to click on this Event Operations window because from here we can select any number of different tools to use. So we've got quantize, change velocity, change duration, transpose, and then some of these other ones that we will discuss as the semester goes on, or we may have already discussed. Um, First, the quantize menu is going to allow us to take the notes that may have been played in without a click track or played with a click, but they're just not on the click, and it can move the notes so that they line up with the closest grid line. And so when we choose note on, that's going to move the beginnings of the note to line up with the closest grid line, and note off, if you select that, it will stretch the note to also be with the nearest grid line to the note off command. If you have preserve note duration, it's going to keep the note the same length and just move it to the closest grid line. If I turn this on, it turns that one off because it's going to stretch the lengths either longer or shorter to be, let's say you're just over a quarter note, it's going to push it in to be a quarter note exactly, or if you're just under a 16th note, maybe it'll stretch it to be an exact 16th note. But normally you just kind of preserve that. There's another way we can mess with that too in the duration tools. Also, we have our grid. What are we quantizing to? So think about the smallest rhythm that you're going to be matching up with. If it's 16th note or an 8th note, if you go here, you might get some funny rhythms going because it's going to be matching your rhythm up with a very small beat division. So most likely you're going to have it on 16th or maybe even 8th note if there aren't any small notes. You may even do quarter or half or whole note if it's just long pads. And that way you don't have to worry about the notes being moved to smaller divisions that you don't want to mess with. If we're using triplets, we can select that, and it's going to select 3. So for example, it's set to a ratio of 3 in the time of 2, which means you'd get 3 eighth notes in the space of 2 eighth notes if we're in a triplet, which is essentially what a triplet is. Offset by grid is going to have the note land after the beat. So if I say, which ticks are a MIDI function where it's tied to the grid and not the timeline. So if I were to say 10 ticks, it'll be 10 ticks after the beat lands, and we'll see what that looks like. And then randomize is another tool where if we don't want everything to be so metronomic, we want it to have a little bit of life to it, we can have it kind of randomized so that it's going to be plus or minus, and the amount of percentage will determine how extreme that will be. Swing is going to give it somewhere in that world between triplet and even eighth note. So for example, if we're doing even eighth notes like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and swinging it at 100% would be 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 1, like a shuffle. But you can kind of have it be not exactly swung. So depending on the feel of your music, you may mess with the swing a little bit. Include within means if it's within a certain percentage of the beat, we're going to quantize it. And if it's beyond that, we're going to let it go and not quantize it. And then exclude within is the opposite. So if it's within, let's say you don't want to move the notes that are really close to the beat, you want to leave those ones as they are, you can say, hey, if it's within 2% of the beat, we want to just leave it alone. But if it's something that's way out, then we want to quantize it. And then the strength is how strong are we going to quantize it. So we can say, I only want it to get 80% closer to the beat than it is now. That way you're not totally sucking all of the life out of your performance. And it'll allow it to have a little bit of life to it, but just kind of reining it in a little bit. All right, so that's the quantize panel, and you'll get more comfortable with what these tools go in our exercise and as we go on with the semester. Our velocity tools allow us to control how hard the notes were pressed. And the note off, in most cases, isn't going to do anything for you. We're mostly concerned with the attack of the note on. There may be some instances where that affects it, but most instruments, that's not going to really do anything. If you're working with, let's say, drums, and you want all your snare drum hits to be the exact same, and you played it in by hand, you can just highlight your notes and say, hey, set everything to whatever velocity you choose, which it goes all the way up to 127. So, for drums, you may say 100. But in other cases, let's say you drew in a part for piano and you want the piano to have some life to it, you can scale it, or you can scale it smoothly, or you can do it by a percentage. All right. And you can also, let's say everything was just played in too quietly. You like the velocity, but it just, for that instrument, it needs to have a bunch more. You can add, let's say we want to add 30 to it, and it'll just bring everything up that amount without removing the integrity of what you played. It'll just add more overall velocity. Or you could do the same by subtracting. If it's too strong for that instrument, but you like the dynamics, you can just bring it down, because different instruments behave differently. In some cases, you may need to add or subtract to get it to sound the way you want it to. All right, and then you can also limit your velocity by saying, hey, I don't want it to go below 60, because let's say it's, again, like percussion or piano or something where below 60, it just hardly, you don't even really hear it. So let's say we don't want it to be below 60. And we don't want it to go above 120. And that way it will allow your dynamics, but it's going to kind of compress it in a way to only allow, so that the quietest you're going to play it, no matter what, is 60. And that allows you to still play everything in, but and allow dynamics, but kind of not so extreme. And then again, you can randomize it and have it give a little bit of just kind of life if it was something played in very starkly. All right. Next, we have our change duration tool. The change duration tool is great if you need to set everything to be a certain length and it wasn't originally done that way, or you need to expand or contract the length of something. So you can set everything to the same length, like let's say for a pad or something where you just want everything to be perfect quarter notes. You could play it in however you want and then just set it. So that would be one beat, and then you can go less than a beat too if you want it to be slightly smaller. Legato is going to either overlap. In some cases, you may want your notes to overlap just a smidge, or you may want to have them have a little bit of a gap. Like with a pad, you might want quarter notes or whole notes as a pad, but you don't want the pad because it's got some release to it. You may make it so it actually ends a little bit before the next bar starts. And so you can kind of set that, like I had this set for 20. So, it'll give you, and we'll see when we do our exercise what that really means. And you can also have it remove overlaps if your notes are overlapping and leave a gap. And then this tool here is going to, if you've got a sustain pedal like in a piano, you can have it make it so that the piano sustain pedal is going to release every time the note off releases. And that way you don't have the sustain pedal stuck on forever. And then you can have it delete sustain also. And then again, this is a more detailed, as it gets further up, it's going to become more extreme. So it's kind of an exponential version by percentage of how much we're going to change the duration. And then again, we can limit the range of it so that nothing can be over a certain length or under a certain length. And we can randomize it. Okay, if you want to have random note lengths. Normally, note lengths you don't want to be too random. It kind of depends on the instrument. Like with drums, you may want everything to be just 16th notes so that it's just nice and clean looking. So a lot of times I'll use the change duration and just make everything a 16th note. But in other cases, you want it to be a little bit more natural. And then the last one I'm going to talk about today is our transpose tool. So we can move everything up or down if, let's say, we want to move our notes up a few, or like you change instruments and it's too low of a register, you can bring it up, or you may want to change the key of your song. And so you can highlight the notes, and rather than clicking and dragging them and trying to make sure it goes to the right place, you can just say, hey, I want to bring everything up one octave or one semitone or whatever. Which a semitone is going up the piano chromatically. So like C to C sharp to D sharp. Each of those are considered a semitone. So each octave has 12 semitones in it. And then we can also move the notes. Let's say everything is on C sharp 3 and it's a kick drum, and we want to change instruments, and the new kick drum is, D4. So you can kind of move it a very specific amount of space if that's what you need to do. So these transpose tools, and then you could also move everything. Let's say you kind of played all over the place and you want to set everything to one note, like for hi-hat or something like that. You can just have everything that you played move to the same note. And then you can also transpose in a certain key. So if we're want to keep everything, if we want to go from D to F, we can have it do that and keep all the notes in the correct scale. All right, so those are the tools within our event operations. Again, we can kind of click through that way. One thing I didn't show is we can also right click, and this is a little bit faster than going up and find our tools here. So as we get into this exercise, it'll be kind of arduous to kind of go up here and click this and then do that. You can just right click with your mouse and your event operations are right there. Okay, guys, so those are the MIDI edit tools that we're going to be working with. And the nice thing is they're also pretty much the same in any DAW you work with. So Pro Tools, Logic, Cubase, Ableton, all of those terms pretty much hold true. And they might look a little bit different, but they all pretty much do the same thing. All right, so I hope that helps, and we will be moving on now.